Hello, this is Paul Johnson with the Optimistic American. We have a great guest today, General Wesley Clark. Now, General Wesley Clark has a very illustrious past. He was a graduate of West Point, graduated at the top of his class, went on to become a four-star general, and actually became the Supreme Allied Commander. That means he was the Supreme Allied Commander of not only American troops, but all NATO troops. His job as Supreme Allied Commander was to deal with a tyrant named Milosevic in Bosnia, who was literally involved in an ethnic cleansing. General Wesley Clark's career has been one that is almost storied. Now, today he's going to talk about a variety of things that I think that you'll enjoy, but the beginning of his program is to talk about the Civility Leadership Institute. He's put an incredible focus on what it is that we can do as Americans to have better conversations with one another. It's a program that I went through. I enjoyed my time with it, and certainly I think it's something you'll enjoy as well. It definitely ties to our new book, Addictive Ideologies, that Dr. Emily Basha and myself wrote, where we're talking about how it is that we help Americans restore their sense of agency. Again, we're here with General Wesley Clark. I think you're going to enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us today. General Clark, welcome to our show today on the Optimistic American.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Great to be with you.
So here's my first question for you. I've spent quite a bit of time with you. I had the honor of being able to work on your presidential campaign. We all know that you were, one of the top graduates of West Point. You went on to become a four-star general. You were Supreme Allied Commander, which is maybe the most awesome title I think I've ever heard of ever. But you've decided to put a focus on how it is in this country we can do a better job of having a civil discussion with a program that I had the honor of being able to go through, the Civility Leadership Institute. Here's my question. With all that you know that's going on in the world with challenges that we're having from authoritarian governments, why did you decide to make that a major focus of your life?
Well, the thing about democracy, Paul, is that it has many, many components. You have to have laws. You have to have leaders. You have to have institutions. But I can't affect the laws. I tried to work on the leadership piece. I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to run for president. The institutions were set up by the founding fathers. They get modified. But if you look at it, if you took the leaders, the laws, and the institutions and just transplanted them to another country somewhere, Central America, South America, Africa, Asia, would it produce America? No, because really the fundamental that makes democracy work is the culture of the people. It's what people believe. It's how they view their lives. It's not that America is a Christian nation. In fact, the founding fathers were pretty clear it wasn't. But they did say that the kinds of principles that were taught in Christianity, a sort of secular religion of respect for others, listening, trying to be humble about your own achievements and ideas, taking in, working with others, the golden rule, treating others as you'd like to be treated. These were all the things that make America possible. There'll always be really great people who run for office with incredible talents and characteristics, and there'll always be a legal structure that mostly works, and institutions, and they don't have to be locked in concrete. None of that. It really all comes from the culture of ordinary people. Are you willing to listen? Do you thirst for revenge, or do you understand that hatred and revenge, this urge for revenge and attacking other people, it hurts you? What is your spiritual core? What's the basis on which you're leading your lives? What are you up to in the world? The cumulative effect of all that, all people working together, that's what gives us America.
So what is it that you think that we're lacking that we need to put a greater focus on today? Do you think that we're lacking that skill set, the ability to communicate with one another?
Well, what's happened to the United States is that communications interactions between people have been accelerated, and they've been exacerbated by partisanship, accelerated by social media, Facebook and Twitter and TikTok, and ideas and opinions just surge back and forth in a way that, well, it hasn't been like this since maybe Athens or ancient Rome, when people could stand together in the forum and gossip back and forth. Did you see what Polonius did? And what about Gaius Caesar? And yeah, I heard it, that kind of gossip. And the way America functioned for 200 years was that it was a representative democracy. The big push in the 20th century by Democrats especially has been greater transparency. And greater transparency, along with this acceleration of interpersonal communications, and then you throw into the mix this idea that the airwaves, the internet, it's not really, it used to be considered public property. Back in the 1930s, we had the Federal Communications Commission installed, and they said the radio waves, that's for the public good, and there was a fairness and broadcasting standard. And yeah, it was tough to say what it was, and in the 1980s we got rid of it. We got rid also of the idea that you could only have so many radio stations or TV stations in a single market. And so it all served to advance people's business interests. There were roll-ups of TV stations, roll-ups of radio stations, and what was once small business America became unified across the country. And then someone discovered shock radio and said, by God, people will listen to radio if you can really make it entertaining. I came back from Europe in 2000. I was giving a speech at the Everglades Club in Florida, and one of the hostesses there, the wife of one of the founders of the club, I guess, said to my wife, she said, don't you just love Rush Limbaugh? Isn't he fun? And my wife said, was that a joke? And we just come from overseas. We hadn't seen this profound transformation in American politics from the time when people who ran for office were a little mysterious. They were a little respected. I mean, there were people on the inside who knew that JFK was a real party animal, so to speak. But to the American people, he was like, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And through the partisanship and shock talk and other things, we've stripped away the sort of the mystery and respect and the aura around leaders. Maybe that's a good thing, but it was accompanied by the fueling of, it's all right to say he's a no damn good dog or something like that about people. It brought the level of public discourse down. It released these profound emotions of anger, resentment, hatred, that responsible journalists were taught in journalism school. You can't write these things unless you show both sides and have evidence. And an editor checked it. Well, now it's unrestrained. And, emotion begets emotion. People tell you, when I see you, the hair on the back of my neck stands up. Well, pretty soon, after people say that to you, pretty soon the hair on the back of your neck stands up when they say it. I mean, and this is it's a downward spiral in terms of the culture. What we're trying to do is help people understand that what unites Americans in this country is much greater than what divides us.
I think one of my favorite parts of the program that I definitely enjoyed, I'm certainly a person who spent a lifetime sharing his opinions with people even when they didn't want to hear them. But the key was understanding your own individual responsibility, how each of us have to be accountable for ourselves. I love the part of the program where they focused on crucial conversations and where they did experiments or small test programs. I recall the whole idea of this story that you tell yourself, and how there's that second before you respond to someone where you really determine your destiny, where if you're angry, if you're mad, if you label them, if you strike back at them with angry words, that conversation is going to go in a very wrong direction and have a huge impact on your life. But if you can start by telling yourself a story that changes the way that you're seeing what the other person is seeing, you can begin to gain real input from them, and you can begin to try to have a deeper understanding of what they're saying. You might actually learn something in the process. And then the skill sets of being able to find mutual purpose become available to you. If you're angry and mad, you're not going to find mutual purpose. But if you've taken the time to be more thoughtful and deliberate, that conversation can change. But to me, the idea, the greatest thing that I gained out of the program was, hey, don't look around for who else is at fault of this problem. I'm at fault. I play a role. I have to fix me and make certain that I get better at how I communicate with others.
Well, Paul, that's great. And I'd like to use this statement on my podcast about why we need the Civility Leadership Institute, because I think that's true. But, you have to then go from there into politics. And so it's about listening to other people. It's about not snap judging. It's about not looking at somebody and say, oh, I've seen people like that all my life. They're all bums or something. I had a really tough experience in my life. I was there at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial opening. It was Veterans Day, I think, of 1982. And I was a lieutenant colonel. They asked me to wear my uniform. I wore my uniform. I saw a bunch of people that looked like druggies there. They had all beat up field jackets and first cav patches and stuff, and they were probably smoking dope, and their hair was unkempt, and they were all messed up. And I'm thinking, that's exactly what has given us so much problem in the Army. And here they are wearing their Army regalia. It took me a while before I realized that they were products of the Army, that their difficulties in their lives, we had a big part in that. And they were victims of the Vietnam War in a way just like the names on that Vietnam Veterans Memorial were. I learned a big lesson in my own life on that. And I've seen it reflected in other areas of American life. And I think one of the things I hope people get out of the civility leadership is look into other people. Don't judge them by appearance, by background, by whether they're tattooed and their skin color or whatever. Look in to see what they're all about. What's their idea? Where is it going? In small town America, when we built this country on the frontier, people had to work together. They didn't always agree, but somehow we built a transcontinental civilization that became a moving force in world history. We don't want to lose that. Abraham Lincoln said the only way we'll ever be defeated is if we defeat ourselves, or words to that effect. And that's absolutely true. I mean, the ingenuity, the spirit of America, the idea that we're all individuals, but we're in this together, it's unbeatable. But if we have to resort to tribalism, if we, because of fear and insecurity, say, well, he doesn't look like me, and therefore I can't trust him, or got the wrong accent, or wasn't born here, or, whatever diminutive you want to use. I mean, we've had successive waves of immigration in this country, and we've wrestled with this step by step by step by step. I mean, there was a time when the Irish couldn't be hired in New York City. Now, people all over the country follow Notre Dame like it's their school. 100 years ago, they would have looked at the Irish as, hey, they're bums. We don't want them working here. They bring trouble in. So what we've shown in America is that we assimilate on the basis of our common humanity, and that there's a culture that brings us together. That's what the Civility Leadership Institute is all about. And Paul, what you just said, illustrates that maybe, it was pretty effective.
Oh, I think it's a very effective program. First, we tend to see things in black or white. You just made a comment about our country, the focus on individualism, but yet we all have a common purpose. And at the same time, we have to fight with tribalism. Well, I've been convinced for a very long time that one of our big challenges is that we have these fringes who don't believe in individualism. They tend to buy into a more authoritarian or a group-like type setting, and that's both on the right and the left. But the reality is, as you start to listen to people on those sides, there's a wide variety of different people in those groups, oftentimes who haven't really thought through their positions all that well. And when you begin to categorize them and label them, you're really creating a justification in your own head for why it is that you can treat them badly. And the better answer, if we want to preserve a country that's focused on individualism, allow other people to be individuals. Listen to what their point of view is. Try to understand where they're coming from. And maybe if you do that, you have a chance that they'll listen to you as well. But if you don't do that, there's no chance they'll listen to you. There's no chance that you're going to have communication. And again, what I saw over and again was inside the CLI was that there was a diversity of people with a diversity of opinions. And as you began to listen to them and not create a category for them, it gave you an ability to have a richer understanding of what our society was about and how I could be a more active participant.
Yeah, the society goes through swings too, Paul. I mean, the country has been through three major political epochs since the American Civil War. There was the Gilded Age, where people made money hand over fist by exploiting other people. And they got away with it until finally people that were working in the mines and farmers that were struggling to buy the seed and pay for help and buy the new machinery finally said, enough's enough. And the political system listened to it. It really took from 2000, it really took from 1905 into really the 1960s to go through and move away from the Gilded Age of sort of, I've got mine and you didn't work hard enough and you don't deserve it, to something that said, we got to take care of the sick and the elderly and the injured. We put the Social Security and disability system in the 1930s, and President Roosevelt tried to get Medicare in, couldn't do it. That took Lyndon Johnson, and then Ronald Reagan, Goldwater, really, Reagan picked it up, of the cowboy, the rugged individualist. I did this myself, my six gun, my rifle. I mean, I picked them off out there. I secured my farm, my family. It's a good strain of thought, individual responsibility. Yeah, that's important. But you have to balance it by the fact that, at least when I was growing up, we always thought that when people were putting up a farm, the neighbors came and helped. They didn't say, you're on your own. You get up on there, you handle that beam on the rafters. We're not helping because that's your problem. We always had the image that people work together to build a nation. And I think we're coming out of this age of Reagan now. I think when you look at the energy on the left of America, and you look at the efforts of voter suppression and what Mr. Trump tried to do to stay in office, and most Americans, they don't follow politics that close, despite, what shock radio would like. They're like to politics what some of us are like to the World Series. And when you get, in September, people saying, well, who's going to be in the World Series? And they're like, oh, I heard there's an election coming up. What's it about? But those people in the middle, those people who are not so crazedly partisan, they're the swing voters that actually decide the course of America. They take a moment out of their own lives. They use common sense. And this is the culture that I'm talking about. If they have the idea that, you got to put in programs that look after people, you can't expect the private sector to invest in all the airports, because then they'll own the airports. Then there won't be any airports if there's no profit for them. You've got to do some things for the public good. Get that balance right. That's what I'm talking about for America. And you can only do that if Americans work together. It's about our culture, not about the leaders, not about the legal system, not about the institutions, Congress versus the Supreme Court. It's really about every 2 years there's elections. What are people saying? What do they think?
So years ago in your campaign, I recall when you were coming to Arizona, I said, okay, so who do you know there? And you kind of struggled with it for a moment. And you said, well, there are some refugees that I knew in the Bosnian community. Maybe you can contact them. I don't know if you recall, but when you came out to my house, we ended up with hundreds of them that came onto our street, people holding their babies, crying because of their great gratitude for what it was that you had done. Here's my question about that. What we know that what happened in Bosnia with Milosevic and others was a breakdown of society. They had the Yugoslavian society that seemed to be united, and then when he died and passed away, it began to break apart. What were the similarities that you saw with what happened there and here, and what are the differences? What is it that we can still feel secure about?
Yeah, he was able to use the recent memories of people to stoke fear and excite violence. We've been more than 150 years since the American Civil War. So we're far removed from the memories of violence that were the fuel for Milosevic to create chaos in Yugoslavia. I think that's the biggest thing. When I was in there and I met Serbs, I met Bosniaks, and same language basically. Can't tell them apart by looking at them. I thought, my God, and these people are killing each other. They hate each other. Why? Look at the problems we have in America. The problems of race, the problem of assimilation of immigrants and so forth. And yet we've been able to do it because, Paul, it's really very simple. Once the killing starts, it's really hard to turn it off. This is the thing about Ukraine. This is what Putin, maybe he didn't get it. It's like, we're going to kill enough of you so you like us. Well, that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen in Ukraine. They're not going to give in to the Russians. To the last man, they'll hate them for what they've done. I saw it and felt it in Bosnia. It's when the prime minister of Bosnia said to me, he said, I've seen the Serbs torture a 5-year-old boy. He said, I can understand why you torture a grown man, but a 5-year-old boy? I'm thinking, I was proud of the U.S. Army because we don't torture people. We don't believe in it. In fact, when I was in government, we signed an international convention against torture. And here was this man talking about torture as though it's an everyday thing. There's a man who wrote a book about what happened there, and he explained it this way. He said, partly the grandmothers kept the hatred alive.
Wow.
They would say to little Mo, you can play with little Ivan, but never forget his grandfather killed your grandfather. These memories, these passions. And there's no doubt that they were present in the American South. believe me, in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, you didn't say Sherman was a great general in Georgia. They hated him. And some of these great Confederate leaders, Jeb Stuart and others, they weren't so great. There was wholesale destruction in Tennessee, bridges, railroads, homes, northern Mississippi, parts of Arkansas, wrecked the economy. That's why 150 years later, the South is still struggling to come back from that destructive war. But it's been many generations. And those sharp memories have passed. Got to keep the violence out.
All right, so here's a question for you. I'm a believer in what we're doing in the Ukraine, and I certainly was a believer in what you were doing in Bosnia. But a lot of Americans, I think, ask the question, with all the problems we have here, why are we spending any time there? I can't think of anyone more qualified to answer that question than you are, simply because of what you did in Bosnia. But what's the reason that we're in the Ukraine? Why is it important to Americans? And what's the role that we need to play to be able to see this thing through to its end?
Well, we've been mostly safe in the United States since World War II. We got rid of the draft during the Vietnam War. Americans today, and for 50 years, the service is voluntary. You don't have to learn to shoot a rifle unless you want to. And nobody's told you you're going to spend 2 years in uniform. We haven't really been threatened with invasion since the Brits in 1812, 1814, when they sacked Washington, D.C. So we've got a real sense of security in the United States that might be unwarranted. That is to say, people all over the world know fear when they live. And you don't have to name it, but let's name a few. India and Pakistan, when it came apart, millions of people died. Ethiopia and Eritrea, fighting going on just recently. Ukraine, the Balkans. There's fear in many places of the world. And what we're trying to do is establish an international order of law and the peaceful settlement of disputes by strengthening international organizations, by using law, by punishing people who transgress that law. Here's Vladimir Putin. He's invaded another country, just flat out invaded. He claims he's afraid, so he's killing all these people. It's crazy stuff. If he gets away with it, it's like pulling the thread on a sweater. You can rip the whole sweater apart. And he could rip the whole fabric of post-World War II peaceful development apart. That's why we have to oppose him in Ukraine. That's the fundamental reason. He's trying to destroy our system of laws. He's trying to say that might makes right. He's trying to say that if you have the more powerful army, you can take over territory. He's trying to say it's all right to kill other people, innocent people. None of that's all right. That's why we're supporting Ukraine.
So you had a great program on with two people of opposite points of view. One whose biggest fear was that Putin may use nukes, Jeffrey Sachs. The other whose point of view was, one, he's not going to stop here. He's not going to stop just simply with Ukraine. And number two, if you allow nukes to be used as a threat, we might as well give him Alaska, because at the end of the day, he's not going to stop. They're going to continue moving a forward march. On those two positions, which two worry you more?
Well, I can't agree with my friend Jeffrey Sachs. He's recently basically repeating Putin's lines. He wants to blame NATO. He wants to say that NATO expansion is threatening Russia's security. That's silly. The reason NATO expanded is because of Russia threatening its neighbors. They were threatening their neighbors in the 1990s. People in Eastern Europe knew, as one foreign minister said, look, today Russia's weak. Someday it'll be strong. They'll be back. And before then, my country has to be a member of NATO. Russia's back. Putin brought them back. He wants Eastern Europe. This is 300 years of Russian imperialism. And they're mean imperialists. When you're part of the Russian orbit, they come in and they say, we're Russians. You're little Russians, or worse than that. You do what we say, and it's corrupt. It's not the rule of law. It's the rule of power. That's the way it's been. Some people say it's a Mongol influence. Some people say Russia's not European, it's Asian. Well, whatever it is, it's not the way we live.
So, last question that I will use to try to make certain that we keep you on time. It seems to me like we have two leaders internationally that are following that line, who don't like the American world order that was established after 1945. And by the way, my view of the American world order is it really is a world order that follows the rule of law. We don't win all the time. Oftentimes, inside these international organizations that we've created, the United States ends up not being successful at its positions. But they seem to be more intent on, one, disrupting that rule of law and the American world order, and more importantly, creating a new hierarchy. And it's a hierarchy that I don't think there will be the ability for other nations to win or lose. It'll have to follow the hierarchy. I see both of them as a threat. I'd love to know your position on how it is that you think that we deal with those two threats, Xi and Putin, Russia and China, and what do you think is our best way forward to be able to make certain that we can preserve the world that we've all known to love and prosper in?
Well, there's two ways forward, really, Paul. One way is forward is the way of appeasement. Nobody wants a conflict. Nobody in this country, at least, wants a war. And certainly Western Europe doesn't. And so one way forward is to slowly give ground, compromise, appease, stall it from one election to another. Just if the political leader can get through this election, there was peace in my day. Yeah, there's trouble ahead, but that's for the next guy. That's one way to deal with it. Democracy, America, we're a mighty oak tree. It's going to bring a lot. We think it'll take a lot to bring us down. So maybe we could get through 1, 2, 4 election cycles, backing off, appeasing. You could say, give up NATO. It's not that important, really. I mean, we're still investing with each other. And if it makes Russia happy, maybe that's, that's okay. I mean, make it have half of NATO. Give up on the pledge. This is the Jeffrey Sachs position. He wants peace now. Let the future take care of itself. Let's don't take any risks. My position is different. I think that you have to take the risks now, because if you don't, you'll be forced to take greater risks later. If we don't support Ukraine, which has the strongest army in Europe, and we allow Russia to overrun, crush Ukraine, take its people and its resources, and give them 4 years to rebuild and restructure, while we go on with business as usual in the West, we'll end up with a crisis that does go nuclear, or that ends up in such a situation that we realize that our nuclear weapons are useless in deterrence, and will be in massive rearmament. We have a $858 billion defense budget or something like this going forward. We'll have a $3 billion defense, a $3 trillion defense budget going forward if we don't handle Ukraine the right way.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
And the thing about it is that Taiwan is not Ukraine. Asia is not Europe. You can't simply say, well, okay, the formula worked in Europe, and let's just apply the same formula. Let's build a NATO in Europe, and let's arm Taiwan and hope it works like Ukraine. It won't. In Taiwan, there's not the same sense of nationhood, the same sense of distinctiveness. Yes, there's some, but there's mostly the same language with mainland China. And they don't want to be incorporated. At least most of them don't. But are they willing to destroy the island? Probably not. And these other countries in Asia, Vietnam, they're going to join a NATO? Absolutely not. It's a communist country. Cambodia? Of course not. They're deeply entrenched with China right now. Indonesia? Nope. They say they don't want to be part of either bloc. India? Well, they're part of the Quad, but they're not about to sign up against Russia. So when you look at this, you realize that we're playing really for all the marbles in Ukraine right now. This is the world looking at the strength of the United States. Do we believe in the values we've expressed? Are we willing to sacrifice economically to support those values? And do we have the leadership to bring others on our side? Or is every Russian artillery strike a hatchet going at the mighty oak of global civilization led by the United States? What's it going to be?
I appreciate that, Wesley. Well, General Clark, I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough for the impact that you've had on my life personally. I also can't thank you enough for the leadership that you're showing in America. The ending statement that you just gave is very powerful, but I think it really does come back to us recognizing that we all play a role individually right here at home and trying to make certain that we make this democracy work. We can't make it work around the world if we can't make it work right here at home.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Paul. Look, thanks very much for having me on. Thanks very much for your support many years ago in Phoenix, and it was great having you in Civility Leadership Institute. Stay with us, and let's keep it going. Let's make it into a nationwide movement that people reappreciate each other.
Yeah, I really recommend every legislator and congressman should go through it. If someone wants to sign up for the program, can you give them just a little information on that?
www.renewamericatogether.org. Come to our website. Tell us you want to be part of us. Thank you.
All right. General Clark, thank you so much. Thanks for taking time today.
Thank you, Paul. Bye-bye now.
All right.